What are the phases of matter? Your goal in this video at the end is that I can describe the shape and volume for each phase of matter. What are the phases of matter? Matter most commonly occurs in three phases. And as you probably know, those phases are solids, liquids, and gases. For solids, those include things like solid water, ice, bricks, wood, and iron. Liquids include things like petrol or gas, vinegar, paint, and liquid water. Gases include things like steam for water, helium, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen. Let's take a look at what happens when you move each phase of matter to a different container. What happens when you change its container? And we're going to look for each phase specifically at whether or not its shape changes and whether or not its volume changes. Remember, volume is how much space it takes up. So starting with solids, if you take a solid and move it from one container to another, its shape does not change. We say it has a definite shape. So a rock in a skinny container is going to look exactly the same as a rock in a long, tall container. Its volume also does not change. So a solid rock has a definite volume. It takes up the same amount of space no matter what container we put it in. This is because the atoms in a solid are tightly packed together. They're so tightly packed together that it will keep its shape and it will keep its volume, the amount of space it takes up, no matter what container it's in. For liquids, it assumes the shape of its container. That's a scientific way of saying its shape changes. So here we have some water with some food coloring in it, so it's easy to see, and it's starting out as a rectangle. And then when I pour it into a cup, notice that the liquid's shape changes. Now it's shaped like a circle. So liquids assume the shape of their container. However, liquid's volume does not change. It will still have a definite volume. It takes up the same amount of space even when you move it to a different container. For example, in our picture in our notes, the shape has changed as it moved containers, but notice the volume is still the same. It's still 200 milliliters of water in both containers. This is an example of 6 different containers that all have different shapes, but the volume is the same. All of them are holding exactly 1 liter of water, so it still is taking up the same amount of space. Liquids have a definite volume to them. That's why they can overflow a container if the container doesn't have enough volume to hold them. This is because the atoms in liquids are loosely packed together. They can slide around one another to change shape, but they still are going to take up a definite amount of space. Let's look at gases. Gases, just like liquids, assume the shape of their container. They do change shape or assume the shape of their container. So the air's atoms are shaped like whatever container they're in. So in our playground ball, the air's atoms are shaped like a sphere. If we were to put that same air in an inflatable cube, then those air's atoms are going to be shaped like a cube. What's different about gases, though, is that gases not only assume the shape of their container, but they also assume the volume of their container. In other words, they completely fill up any closed container. When you fill something up with gases, it will take up the entire space. It doesn't just sit on the bottom of the container the way liquid does. So it changes both shape and it changes volume. So it will completely fill up any container that you give it. If you remember with our syringe, you can see how we had the same amount of air, but you can compress it and make it take up less space or more space, but it's going to push back and take up the whole container. So that is because the atoms in a gas are spread far apart. So they don't keep the same shape, but they also don't keep the same volume or space. So see how you did. See if you can describe the shape and volume for each phase of matter by playing this Kahoot and competing against Miss Davis.